Yo. Dude, yes.
There he is.
Oh, dude, that's a nice fish.
That's a nice fish.
All right, folks, this is Brian Mays, and you are listening to another episode of the Amazing Outdoors Podcast. Well, folks, I hope this one goes quicker. I've been getting a little long-winded, and I told myself early on when I started this podcasting endeavor that I did not want to do this. So, number one, Patreon. Those folks that are on the fence, like I said last time, I get it. I do get it. I really do. But it's only $5 a month. Consider it. Thank you, Paul, Todd, and Pat. If somebody has joined in the last 2 weeks, I apologize. I didn't get the shout out on this one. I'm a little ahead of the game. We're giving away a pair of Uplnd Outfitter pants to the patrons of this show. It's a patron only giveaway. They're $180 value. There are still some hats to give away to the first 10 patrons of this show. So go scoop this stuff up for $5. You're just not going to get a better deal out there in the podcasting realm right now. Like I said before, I'm not going to get into it again. Listen to the previous show notes, first 10 minutes of the episode 43 for a little bit more detail. But the bottom line is I'm not trying to take an income from this. I want to turn this all back into the listeners. So give it some thought. I want to have a kick-ass bird camp. I want to have a kick-ass fishing trip for some listeners. Kind of raffle this stuff off. I want to do a monthly giveaway, but I cannot do this without you folks over at Patreon. So I tried to make this as easy as possible for you all to join and take part and become and help us all build this community. And thank you very much for those who are currently patrons of the Amazing Outdoors Podcast. So we are part of Waypoint Outdoor Collective now. If you haven't checked out Waypoint, check them out. It's Waypoint TV. You can listen to us on your smart TV or smart device. Go to the App Store, download the Waypoint TV app. It's totally free. And you can get more than just my show there. There are a bunch of kick-ass hunting and fishing podcasts and other TV shows, streaming stuff. You really should check it out. Uplnd Outfitters. Again, if you don't want to get into Patreon and become a patron of this show for $5 a month and get a chance to win these pants, and you want to pay whole retail value minus 20%, use discount code AMAZING. Uplnd Outfitters, discount code AMAZING. Be relentless, get a pair of these pants, and I promise they won't hold you back. I'm still blown away by them. And if you want to hear me rant and rave more about it, listen to episode 35, where I catch up with Jason, who owns Uplnd Outfitters. Yeah, you did miss the exclusive deal for Christmas, but I think the Patreon deal is better. So, again, check out patreon.com/amazingoutdoors. Number 5, Sport Dog. If you're in the market for an e-collar or a GPS system for your dog, I do highly recommend checking out Sport Dog. If you don't want to take my word for it and you want to dig into it a little bit more, do your research. You could listen to episode 37, where I have Clay Thompson on from Sport Dog, where we talk about this stuff. So, I don't know. I did the Tech Point 2.0 this year. I'm very happy with it. All right, we're moving along a lot quicker today. I do want to urge you all to listen to episode 40 with Scott Anderson of Patriots of Praise. It's a great episode. Patriots of Praise is a small nonprofit organization. They're solely funded by good people and the grace of God. They live off donations, and they don't always know when the next donation's coming in. And these Scott and a couple of folks and the folks in Kansas who help and everybody else who he has kind of in his network, they are truly impacting lives. Scott brings these men and women who put their life on the line for you and me, brings them in to hunt and show them a good time, and shares his faith struggles and his path to, his journey in life. And I think that's really important. These folks, regardless of cause, spend late night hours standing watch over us so you and I can have a peaceful night's sleep. I'm not begging anyone here to send Scott money. Everyone's feeling the pain of rising costs and inflation. Instead, I want to share Scott's mission for Patriots of Praise. The rest is in God's hands, man, and I hope he compels someone out there to help Scott's cause. Enough's enough. The show must go on. This is episode 44. I got a chance to catch up with two Minnesota boys from Pheasants Forever. Eran Sandquist and Tanner Bruse. We didn't even have enough time to cover all the things we wanted to. And I'm going to throw this out to the listeners. If you want to hear more from Eran or Bruse about any of the specific topics, or furthermore, and for that matter, any of our guests and any of the topics, email me at brian@amazin.com and let me know what you think. Got any feedback or just want to say hello? I would love to hear from you. I can't tie up any more of your time. I must get on with the show. So today, I'm going to hit the roll button, folks. Well, gentlemen, I am excited to have you on the show today. This is Brian Mays with the Amazing Outdoor Podcast. I have Eran Sandquist and Tanner Bruse with Pheasants Forever, some Minnesota boys. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, and feel free to talk over each other today. I will try to call you guys out, but I understand how it is on a three-way call here.
It will happen. I guarantee it.
I can almost guarantee it. So thank you so much for coming on, making some time for me today. Eran, why don't you give us a little introduction and tell the listeners who exactly you are, what you do with Pheasants Forever, and actually include a little bit of, I don't know, what's your fancy in the outdoor world here as we kind of come off the hunting season and head into the fishing season?
Well, very good. And thanks, Brian. Just a little bit about me. I'm a born and raised Minnesotan. I never really made it out of the county of Wright, which is just kind of west of the metropolitan area. I was born and raised in Delano, Minnesota, along the banks of the Crow River, and spent a lot of time on the floodplains fishing and hunting growing up as a kid.
I've heard some good things about some smallmouth bass fishing around that area.
Smallmouth bass and walleye have really they've gotten better since I was a young lad. We spent a lot of time fishing catfish and carp and some of the more classic river fish, but there's some tremendous smallmouth fishing to be had there in that area. So then I went off to college and a graduate of St. Cloud State University and go Huskies, and came back and now reside in South Haven, Minnesota, which is on the very western fringe, within a mile of Meeker and Stearns County, and been here since 2005. So never really made it out of Wright County, but it's a great place to raise a family. And I got two young girls, 16 and 12, and Jaden and Ava, and then my wife, Melissa, who we've been raising these kids to be kind of tomboys. So it's been good. They get out and enjoy the outdoors with me, and we've had some pretty good experiences. A little bit else about me: avid sportsman, love fishing, love hunting. You talked about the fall season here. We do a lot of pheasant hunting. I raise Brittany's as well, so
I won't hold that against you. And
Well,
the only
remember
reason
we
I
were
said that is
earlier now.
a couple of my good buddies that listen to the podcast. There's a little bit of a standing joke about Brittany's, but no, they're great dogs. You got French Brittany's or just American Brittany's?
American Brittany's.
So a
Yep,
little bit
and
bigger, right? If I recall.
No, they're a little smaller. Well, I mean, it depends. We raise a Brittany that's pretty small for the average. Our females will be about 30, 32 pounds, roughly.
So you breed them
depending on whether it's hunting season or not. So
do you have pups available then on a regular basis? You've been doing it for a while?
yeah, we've been doing it for about 8 or 9 years.
Wow.
We only raise a litter a year. It's kind of a small family-run deal.
Sure.
So we do have pups available. There's a lot of demand for them, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, we do have pups available.
Well,
but so
one of the big reasons Brittany's were one of the breeds I was looking at when I first wanted to get into bird dogs, but they were so I have short hairs, and I kind of look at bird dogs more like cars. They're all different, and they get you from point A to point B, and it's just kind of what kind of ride do you want, and it's I couldn't find a breeder that had a Brittany pup for under $1,500. It was a substantial cost for Brittany's, moreover than short hairs, and that was probably the biggest reason I ended up with short hairs at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, and they're both good. And I've had short hairs. My dad runs short hairs actually. So, like you said, there's a lot of good breeds out there, and it just depends, kind of what you're looking for and how you want to hunt. And in particular, hunting season's only 3 months a year, so you got to have a good family dog as well. And that's 9 months out of the year. So
exactly.
It's kind of a give and take, and both the Brittany's we have are females, and so between my wife, my 2 daughters, and my 2 female Brittany's, there's not a lot of what I'd call manpower in my house, so it can be pretty estrogen specific at times, but it's a cool thing, and I wouldn't trade it. So
I definitely can relate very much so to that. I have my wife and my daughter here at home, and then I have 2 female short hairs, so I am the only bit of testosterone in the house. And my wife always wonders why my dogs are so attached to me. And I tell her, well, there's 2 reasons. I take them hunting, and I'm the only dude in the house.
Well, and Tanner's in the exact opposite situation of me.
Oh,
Yes.
Well, Tanner, you've been quiet here, so why don't you give the introduction to the podcast and let everybody know who you are as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us on here, Brian. As Eran referenced, I'm on the other spectrum here. I've got 2 young boys, a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. I've got a male lab, so if we want to dive even deeper with dogs and giving each other grief, I am a lab guy.
Hey, I don't have anything against labs. I just don't do the duck hunting thing anymore, and you'll know my short hairs are not great retrievers. It's just something that they love to play with the ball in the back, but there's a little competition between the 2 that's kind of caused a little bit of grief on retrieving birds for me that we're going to work through this year. But man, dogs are great. I don't care. The only kind of dog I really don't care for is the kind of dog that you walk into at your mother-in-law's house and it wants to take off your ankles. I just don't really care for those kind of dogs, but that's a personal thing, and I don't hold anything against anybody for that. But bottom line is you got a dog and you enjoy the hell out of it, and gets you out hunting even better. It's just a different style. So do you do a lot of pheasant hunting, or do you oh geez, I was supposed to close my Outlook and I didn't. Do you do a lot of pheasant hunting, or do you do duck hunting as well?
So I always said I wasn't going to be that guy that was an avid waterfowler and went away from it. With that being said, I grew up in Southwest Minnesota, so God's country, Aaron. We've got a little friendly battle on which parts of the state are the best. But in the heart of pheasant country, I grew up
Well,
down
you
by
got a Wisconsin boy here, so we can go all day long about what's best here in the Midwest.
Absolutely.
But I like every one of the areas you guys, especially Southwest Minnesota, Central Minnesota, and all of Wisconsin. I personally can't figure out where I want to live.
Yeah, and if you want to come down to Southwest Minnesota, the heart of pheasant country, I grew up south of Worthington. If you're familiar with kind of acquisitions and WMAs, I grew up by Worthington Wells, by Lake Bella, in Nobles County, Minnesota.
Sure.
And it's historically known for the chapter and the chapter president, Scott Rawl. I could literally walk out of my parents' house and I could walk on public ground for 12 to 13 miles. With that being said, I was more of a waterfall person growing up, did a little bit of pheasant hunting. And as I progressed, I went to South Dakota State University. Go big, go blue, go Jacks.
Is that out in Aberdeen?
That is in Brookings.
Brookings, okay. Well, what's the
Yep.
one out? My buddy went out to the school out in Aberdeen.
I can't think of which one that is.
I don't know either.
And
I think that's the one he went to. I don't know.
And got married, had a couple kids.
So when you went out to South Dakota over there, I mean, you're at Brookings area, you're even more torn between waterfowl and pheasant hunting.
Absolutely. And at a young age, waterfowl, that was my target. That any moment I had to hunt was waterfowl focused. And after graduating, moved back to Southwest Minnesota. So I live by Marshall, Minnesota now, on 2 acres. I've got a rooster crowing out back. We have some chickens, get some eggs. I've got an inside dog that's behind me snoring. And I've got a lab that's enjoying the sunshine outside. And with having a 5 and 7-year-old, it really took a hit on my waterfowl hunting, to be quite honest with you, Brian. And I've
heard that from folks. I was very privileged in my choices when I decided to get married, and my wife had 2 kids from a previous marriage, and I'm 37 and I have a 19-year-old daughter at home, and the other one's already gone. So I didn't have to deal with that as much, and so it's kind of a foreign topic for me. However, all of my buddies are now having kids, and as a fishing and hunting guide, I'm always looking to get out. And when I'm not taking a client out, I got to go out and stay tuned with what's going on out there. And I'll be damned, man, I cannot find anybody to go fishing with me because they're all in your boat.
Yep. It's crazy times. And, I really ended up growing a huge passion for upland hunting for that very reason, because it's so much easier to sneak out for, an hour or two, go hit some public land close to my house here and bring my big 100-pound dumb male lab, who I may say dumb, but he's actually really smart when it comes to hunting. But he'll give you that impression of, a typical lab. And
not just labs do that, man. I got 2 short hairs I can call rockheads all day long.
I just want both of these statements to be on full record that you guys have said that about your own dogs. I have not said that about Brittany's yet.
Well, see, and that's the thing about you Brittany guys.
We're giving you an opportunity here.
Yeah, we are. And I'm just giving you crap. And honestly, the lab short hair Brittany thing, whatever it is, you guys know, it gets you outdoors. It keeps you tied to the passion. And I'll say this. My dog has taken me to places I've never thought I'd go.
There's that certain connection with having that companion and that dog. And I'm blessed that my wife loves animals. And she doesn't necessarily care if I go hunting, but she does care if the dog goes hunting because she knows how much the dog loves it. So my lab Trigger, my wife Heather will be like, "Are you going to take that dog out? He looks like he really wants to go hunting." And I say, "Yes, dear. Yes, I am."
The ultimate excuse.
But only if you want me to.
Yeah, exactly.
And, for that matter, I enjoy all things outdoors.
You guys do any deer hunting at all?
I'm a seasoned amateur archery hunter. if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah, I can understand where that is.
I do it every year, and I thoroughly enjoy sitting in a tree stand. It's just that time commitment thing again.
Yep.
And I
Well,
really,
and then when you got for me, I grew up whitetail hunting, and bow hunting specifically was my big passion. And when I got a dog, my whole life changed. I
absolutely.
could always sneak away from the kids and the family to get a little deer hunting in, and I don't know what it. I mean, I guess maybe if I had babies and my own really kids that I wiped their own butt growing up, I maybe I would feel this way about my kids too at a certain age, but I don't know. The dogs always got me. I'd sit in that tree stand going, it's grouse season, it's woodcock season, it's pheasant season, and they're at home, and here I am out in the tree stand enjoying myself. This is wrong. So and every time I went pheasant hunting, I'm going, oh, son of a gun, it's a great day for the rut. Why are you doing?
Hard
It's
between interests.
it's being torn, and I know everybody's got to deal with that in the fall, and I know you guys with young kids have it even worse. So
Every
I
time
feel
I put
very blessed most falls.
yes, every time I put the camo on and grab the bow and leave, I have to apologize to my dog. So he looks at me and kind of gives me that look. But
And growing up, much like you, Brian, and I'm sure you'd be able to relate to some of the things I'm going to say here. I was an avid archery hunter, both in state and out. I grew up when I lived in Delano, working on a farm just east of there in Loretto, and made some really good landowner connections. And there's some tremendous whitetail hunting to be had in close proximity to the metro areas, as you probably know, and have seen deer, where you reside in the South Metro. But so grew up, every waking minute of the fall and summer was spent scouting or hunting whitetails. And as I had my kids and they developed an interest in deer hunting, we kind of transitioned to gun hunting more so because they could handle and do that much easier. And so
It's a far less
kinda,
time commitment too. I mean, you look at the archery season and the length, and what you're typically trying to play in the archery season is those cold fronts that come through, especially if you're kind of doing the rut hunting and looking for horns. And gun hunting kind of takes all of that out because it's such a short window. You just go out and do it, and I think that lends itself well for younger people who haven't developed that deep passion yet, and that kind of passion that drives guys to sit in a tree stand 40 days in the fall.
Yep, yep, exactly. And as everybody knows with youth, to get them addicted, they need to have action and quick action. They don't have the patience and necessarily the skill set to draw bows back, at a young age and be able to do all that. So yeah, you're correct. Firearm hunting is just much simpler to introduce folks to the deer hunting, and kudos to the DNR in Minnesota and as well as other states. They've created a lot of great opportunities. Like there's a youth season in Minnesota in October, so ideally the weather's going to be a little bit more favorable for young hunters to stay warm. And but something that you'd probably relate to, at about the college age for me, so early 2000s, late 90s, I discovered fall walleye fishing and how incredibly good that is, and how few people are out taking advantage of that in Minnesota. So a lot of my October now has transitioned from archery hunting to being in the boat with my Brittany's and my kids and taking advantage of that great fall fishing we have in Minnesota.
We have way too many good outdoor activities up here, and not just Minnesota. I mean, when you consider the upper Midwest and being, I had a kind of a life-changing career moment about 12 years ago where I had to make some decisions on leaving Appleton, which was a relatively small metro area, and I had to choose, like Chicago, Milwaukee, or Minnesota, Minneapolis area. And I don't regret at all the decision I made, because when you consider where, just say, Minneapolis, St. Paul is, or any one of the locations you guys are in all general terms, sportsmen are willing to drive. And if you're within a couple hours depending on what your addiction level is to the outdoors, it might be 8 hours, but anywhere from an hour to 8 hours in the state of Minnesota, where either one of us are located, we can be in some totally different kind of topography, different animals, different landscapes that challenge both us as hunters and our companions. We have it damn good up here. You look at like the Chicagoland area, and I scratch my head with what I would do with myself if I was living in or even close to that metropolitan area. There nearly isn't the walleye fishing. There isn't the pheasant hunting. There isn't the deer hunting that we all have up here. And I think we are just absolutely blessed for both what we have and really what Pheasants Forever is doing, what the DNR has been doing. We've made some big progress here, and a lot of opportunities come out of it for all of us. It's a good thing.
Indeed.
Absolutely. And I would say, Eran and I are probably good examples of that, where we never left. I mean, we left for, college and that kind of stuff. And just the opportunity in Minnesota is plentiful. And I can head up there with him and get into some walleye fishing and 24 foot of water. And he can come down here if I could ever talk him into it, and we could catch walleyes in, 6 foot of water.
Yeah. Well, and you got some interest at what you said something earlier, Tanner, that kind of caught me, being a seasoned amateur bow hunter. You're dealing with way bigger dynamic coming from a bow hunting perspective than where Eran and I are. Trees are hard to come by down that way, number one. So I imagine there's a spot and stalk element to your bow hunt that doesn't exist for myself over in the Northwoods in Wisconsin.
Yeah, and deer in the prairie act a little different too. So
way different. I cannot believe some of the just situations I've been in out pheasant hunting out that way, that where I kick deer out of. It just kind of blows my mind on that 3-hour drive back, going, that big buck came out of there. How would I hunt him? And it's just a challenge I haven't had to deal with in life. And so it's really interesting to hear you call yourself that and kind of understand, at least from me, you're in a totally different landscape, so I wouldn't know how to tackle it. So I would consider myself about the same.
Still working on it. Work on it every year.
Well, let's dive in slightly here to your guys' roles and with Pheasants Forever, and then we'll have to take a small little break here for an advertisement. We'll come back and get into some meat and potatoes here. Eran, what is your role with Pheasants Forever? Can you kind of enlighten us a little bit?
I'll start with, I probably have the best job at Pheasants Forever right now, and Tanner may disagree with that. I'll let him decide later, but I've been with the organization for a long time, so I've had several roles, and I've been with Pheasants Forever since 2002. So
that was the year I graduated high school.
Now you're really making me feel old. Thank you.
Well, you dated yourself. I didn't.
You could have just said 20 years.
Yeah. So I'm the state coordinator for Minnesota currently, and I've been in this position since I think 2014. So my job at the simplest level is to just oversee the programs and people of Minnesota. We have, Pheasants Forever was founded here back in 1982, right in Minnesota. So we have a lot of history and brand in the state, and a lot of folks who want to be part of our mission, quite frankly. So we have a pretty extensive program of about $20 million across all of our projects and people in the state. So there's a lot of good things happening in Minnesota, and I get to be part of all of those successes that we have.
So that was a really simple kind of general description, and I want to come back to a little bit more of that later. So there's a lot we can encompass and talk about in different rabbit holes with your role, Eran. Some both I want to discuss on and off air. So I really appreciate the explanation. Tanner, what do you do for Pheasants Forever?
Yeah, absolutely. So my title is Ag and Conservation Program Manager here with Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever in Minnesota. I've been with the organization not as long as Eran, for over 8 years now. And I started in a position that we call Farm Bill Biologist or Farm Bill Wildlife Biologist. And I'm not sure on the year, but I took on the role as basically the Farm Bill Biologist Manager. And it's kind of gravitated towards, private lands conservation in Minnesota. So with that, I oversee a talented staff that ranges usually anywhere from 15 to 20 people. And most of those individuals are Farm Bill biologists. And basically what a Farm Bill biologist does is they're located in a local service center in collaboration with NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and Soil and Water Conservation Districts. And they're basically there to provide, the wildlife voice, be the experts in wildlife habitat, and help farmers, help landowners enroll in voluntary conservation programs. In addition, over the last several years, we also have precision ag and conservation specialists. Those individuals work directly with farmers, and the data that they're collecting within their farming operation, both planting and harvesting. And through looking at the data, they're able to identify acres on their farm over their whole operation that are currently revenue negative. So they're losing money on those acres. And through the different conservation programs that are out there, we can actually showcase and present to them these voluntary options that'll put conservation on the ground and in turn also boost their profitability and their return on investment within their farm operation. And the last position that we have kind of on the private land side here in Minnesota is we have a grazing specialist. So obviously, as you know, cows like grass, they eat it. Pheasants, they need grass, right? And if we can utilize and impact the way that grass is being managed through conservation grazing and rotational grazing, we can really have the benefits of both sides between, wildlife habitat and the livestock operations.
So gentlemen, we have a lot of complex issues to tackle here. I think on this podcast, I'm really glad both of you guys came on. I think there's a level of maybe clearing the air on some misconceptions that we definitely I'd like to touch on. But the podcast's got to make a little money here. I unfortunately have bills to pay now. It's become a little bit bigger than when the project started. So I got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Attention landowners. The Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, is now open. CRP is a great opportunity for those hard to farm acres. It also helps improve a farm's profitability, delivers high quality wildlife habitat, clean water, and healthier soils. The CRP sign up is going on right now through March 11th. Find your local Pheasants Forever biologist at pheasantsforever.org/CRP or visit your local USDA service center. Farm the best, CRP the rest.
This episode is brought to you by Seventh Generation, New York. Did you know that climate pollution costs the state $27.5 billion every year? That isn't some national number, but a direct impact on your well-being. Climate pollution impacts all of us, our health, our communities, and our livelihoods. But it's not too late to change course. As you hear this, a $15 billion investment sits on the table of Albany's legislators. This is an opportunity to transition New York into a regenerative economy and invest in you, in us. It's vital help for communities hit hardest, with improvements in infrastructure and a more stable grid. It's a commitment to a future-fit labor force with job retraining and greater benefits. And it's money back in your pockets through lower energy costs and direct support for low to moderate income households. Tell Albany today. Invest in New York. Invest in us for future generations. To find out more, visit seventhgeneration.com/climate.
All right, boys. I don't even know where to go here. I have so many questions and I'm trying to think of them more over than just from myself. Like, what have I heard? And like, you spend a lot of time with guys in the field, and there's a lot of crap that's talking, a lot of bullshit that goes back and forth. And I've heard, let's just talk about CRP for a second. The history of CRP started, I mean, you talk to the old timers and and not referencing you, Eran, but I mean, guys that I've hunted with who've been around since the land bank days. That was kind of the roots of where some of this program started. And I don't know, Eran, maybe can you highlight a little bit of kind of where CRP, it kind of take us from where it's at today, and maybe start with a little bit of the history on how we got to where we're at today? Because I think there's a little bit of a public misconception that CRP is good, but at the same time, there's a lot of constraints. And I know from myself, from a private land ownership, I have 32 acres. 15 of it is pasture. We're trying to carve out a little bit of home. It only leaves me with like 10 acres of old growth pasture that I have to deal with. And it's on that borderline of whether or not it even can be in a program. But I know guys that have maybe 40 acres where they're slightly in that, or maybe 80 where they have a 40 that could go into this program. I know my family had land growing up, and there was always then we can't do stuff that we want to do on this land if we put it in the program. I had permission for land that was in the CRP program for turkey hunting that I couldn't get access to after, I think it was May 1st or April 15th, maybe back then. I'm not exactly sure on the dates, but there were constraints growing up with the CRP program, and I'm kind of curious where it came from and where we're at today, because I think some of those constraints have been alleviated with different programs, and I don't know that everybody really understands the whole thing.
Yeah, well, I'll start, and then I will definitely defer to Tanner to.
Well, and if one of you guys want to add in when you can, we're going to jump over each other here in the conversation, so feel free to try to jump in at a relevant point if there's something you guys want to add to each other's comments.
You go first, old man.
Are we doing age before beauty, I guess? Is that what we're doing here? Okay. Well, first, one thing that one misconception that I hear a lot, and at least among my circles and, coffee shop talk, it seems to me that since CRP started back in the mid 80s, and in fact, actually the organization, when we started back in 1982, was to develop something that, could protect grass, similar to, I think you mentioned the soil bank era, back in the 60s and stuff, when that was kind of one of the first programs and set-asides, conservation type set-aside programs. So it seems today CRP is such a household name that any grass, any set-aside, sometimes is referred to as CRP, which is Conservation Reserve.
Oh, absolutely.
Program.
I mean, we'll go down to Kansas and we'll be in a walk-in, and it'll be a section of land, and there'll be, maybe 2/3 of the properties, agriculture, Milo, whatever it is. And the person I'm with, or even myself, I catch myself doing it. We're going to go hit this CRP over here. It's just grass. It's probably not even in the program, but because we're so used to, that's just where we find birds as upland hunters. A lot of people just use that term as kind of blanketly for grassland. And that just leads itself to a whole bunch of misconceptions. So I apologize about jumping in there, but I wanted to add a little bit more to your comment with that generalization of CRP.
Yeah, and CRP is really, a great private land program. It's federally based, and there's, in addition to CRP, now there's continuous CRP and a whole array of different conservation type programs that are aimed for private land. And so we're going to talk about public land. We're going to talk about private land today. The CRP is aimed at private land, and essentially taking marginal farmland, highly erodible farmland, environmentally sensitive farmland out of production. 10 to 15 year length of program, so it's not permanent, but it's more than a year or two, and it pays people from the federal government to set aside that land. And then where Pheasants Forever comes in is, how can we make that set aside land as productive as possible for wildlife? So it's not just about retiring marginal farmland, but what are the benefits to water quality, to wildlife habitat? And Tanner mentioned earlier, Farm Bill biologists. That's what those people do, is work one-on-one with landowners in local geographic areas to do that. And CRP and government contracts, as you might imagine, nothing is easy about that. So it can be pretty intimidating for a landowner who wants to do the right thing, wants to set aside some land. You were mentioning you have some land like that. What do I do? Where do I start? And that's where Pheasants Forever can really help, with our farm biologists, shorten that gap and do a lot of the work for them.
Yeah, and I do need to give a quick shout out to Cody over in Polk County, Wisconsin. He, I bought land in December of 19, and I had, because of the topography and the mix of land, it was half agriculture or old agriculture land, and that was pastured, and old aspen poplar stands and a little bit of oak. And the first two people I had on that piece of property were Rough Grouse Society field biologist and Pheasants Forever field biologist. So shout out to Cody and Jared from RGS. So I wanted to do the right thing. And I think a lot of people are like that. And those gentlemen at least came out, talked to me about it, and filled me in on what potential I could have. And I was super early in the process, but I also wanted to develop a homestead and eventually move out there. So I needed to consider all these things before I made any moves, really, is how I felt about it. And I'm probably a little different than the average Joe. I care about conservation and wildlife a ton, and it's a huge cornerstone in my life. But yeah, I can really attest to the fact that the resources are there, even if you're not quite sure and you might be overwhelmed by the fact that you have to deal with the feds on this.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a great point there, Brian. I mean, our biologists work with people, that have 10 acres all the way to 5,000 acres, and there's usually room for habitat in each of those landscapes. And the programs through the federal farm bill, which is where CRP resides, there are so many programs, so many acronyms. I like to call it acronym soup. And one would think you're planting grass, get some seed and plant some grass. But going through programs, there are restrictions, there is paperwork. And we have folks on the ground and great partners in NRCS and soil and water districts that are there to help you navigate through all these different opportunities, all these different programs, all the potential. And we've seen great success to the point where we have nationwide over 200 Farm Bill biologists that are out there willing to help.
Well, it's really good to hear, because I personally have felt the overwhelmingness, and I now have at least got to the point where I understand if I go down the path with the Farm Bill aspects of things and the programs that I can have available to me, I will get X. If I do it on my own, I will get Y. And I have the delta, the cost in between. And I understand those things now. And I didn't when I bought that piece of property. I just had raw numbers and a dream of what I wanted to do. And you guys helped me put together a long-term plan for managing the wildlife and the habitat on my property while I can still enjoy all the aspects of it. And it's fantastic. And one other thing that I will add a little bit more icing to this is it's really up to the landowner how far you want to take it. The resources are available to you through you guys, through these other conservation groups. It's whether or not you want to engage and how deep you want to engage.
Since we talked a little bit about misconceptions here at the beginning with CRP, one other misconception that I hear quite a bit is, well, if we enroll in CRP, our land becomes open to public hunting. And that's not the case. This is a private land program. And while there are ways that landowners can put CRP into public access for a payment, they're not required to. And just in terms of putting it into CRP, it's still private land. It's still access only on permission from the landowner. The landowner still pays taxes as if it were private land. And so some of those folks, in the past have resisted CRP because they think they have to open it up to the public as a result. And that's just not the case.
Well, and too, with that, I look at my family who my grandfather wasn't much of a, he was a World War II immigrant. And so he went through kind of the Nazis taking over the bank system in Holland, and he just didn't trust it. So he didn't trust the stock market. Now he still kept money in the bank, but he was very much I have the opportunity to invest in land and I'm going to buy land. So that was his kind of long-term investment strategy. So we had a ton of land. I was very privileged growing up with opportunity. And when he passed away, my grandmother was always worried about liability. And one of the things that I don't think a lot of people consider with these programs, and especially the public hunting program, is there is liability that is given or been taken away from you as a landowner when you're in these programs, and the cost of your per se umbrella insurance policy and how much you have to pay out of pocket as an individual to insure a private piece of property versus one that's in one of these programs, especially for vacant land that's not being used in the manner, it could be a trust property or something along those lines, and the owner may actually be in a different state. These are great opportunities where you can turn a property that's negative per se in your cash flow situation and turn it into income. And turning that paradigm of, I don't want to let people on the property because it's a liability reason, which I think is one of the biggest reasons people are hesitant to get in that CRP program and let people on the property, is really for liability. You can kind of almost shelter yourself from liability by getting into one of these programs.
Especially in Minnesota, the walk-in access program administered by the DNR. If you don't actually hunt yourself, that's a great opportunity to allow people access. You don't have to have people knock on your door. And, by the way, like you mentioned, liability is taken over through that contract too.
Well, and I even know with like the state of Wisconsin, some of this liability stuff was kind of a farce for landowners, because the state even picks if you give permission to somebody to hunt on your property, the state picks up a certain liability coverage for that if you have X amount of property. There's a bunch of little minute details that come in with liability and insurance, and I don't need to go down that rabbit hole. But I wanted to mention it because I think it's a different perception that people often don't look at. And I think there are people out there who are in the situation, later in life where land has been bestowed upon them and they're not sure what to do with it.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Tanner.
Oh, I was just going to throw out there while we're on the subject. I must throw out some urgency and some deadlines. So for CRP, as Eran mentioned, there are different levels or different programs within CRP. So you got continuous CRP, which you can sign up for at any point in time. There's a grassland CRP that's more geared towards, livestock and livestock production. But in the moment, we've got a general CRP sign up, and that opened on January 31st, and it runs through March 11th. So encourage people to check into that as an opportunity on their properties.
Yeah, and I did get a bit of public announcement per se to podcasters from Jared over at PF there. And I do intend to actually read the script that he sent over prior to this episode, saying that there are some deadlines for some of these programs. But please, if there's any additional information you want to add quickly on that.
Yes, and we have people out there, as I mentioned. You can go to pheasantsforever.org /CRP, and you can actually, throughout the nation, you can type in your zip code and find the closest Farm Bill biologist, and they will either help you personally or help you get to the people within these local offices that can assist you.
Tanner, what was the website again?
pheasantsforever.org /CRP.
Okay. I will make sure to put that in the show notes as well.
Perfect.
So, Eran, I kind of touched a little bit on the legacy component, and is there anything from a public lands aspect that you want to talk about quickly? Well, we're slightly on that legacy component where people are maybe sitting at land that they've been bestowed on and not exactly sure what to do with it, because we've had some really great long-term projects, I think, in the state. But as I mentioned to you in the pre-call, pheasant hunter here in Minnesota is still a little bit at a disadvantage from a public land perspective when we look at competition with other hunters and just available land in general for pheasant hunting. We have a ton, but I will tell you right now, I see a lot of orange when I go hunting.
Indeed. Yeah, and I'm going to have to kind of work up to your question here, but I think it'll be worth it. So,
Please do. Please do.
So far, we've only been talking about private land and the opportunities and programs for private land. Well, in Minnesota and a lot really in the Midwest, public land protection and public land enhancement and restoration is among the top priorities for our chapters. And we really haven't talked about chapters yet. So I want to quick go back to kind of just what makes Pheasants Forever who we are.
Well, and please do. And I'll add a little bit more icing to the cake. I've been out on a number of properties in the last 3 years that you guys have managed, and it's a holistic approach. And I'm really glad to see all the different elements of the habitat restoration and development you guys are doing, because it's not just planting grass. There are windrows that are put in. There's, you guys, I mean, even the state is working on with properties that I know that I was super surprised to see, turnips and, late season food for deer out on these properties that are, and you guys are working with them in collaboration for the grassland restoration portion of this quarter section. So it's a big project. And yeah, we kind of jumped from private land, and why don't you bring us back to home here and kind of start from the bottom a little bit.
Very good. Well, as I mentioned, Pheasants Forever was born back in 1982, right here in the Twin Cities, and due to declining pheasant populations in Minnesota and the concern about that. So, when we were created, we created a unique model that still exists to this day, and the model is chapter based, and chapters locally raise funds through banquets and other means, and they retain those dollars to decide how best to make habitat and mission decisions in their local areas and generally counties. And so in Minnesota, for example, we have 72 chapters, and so you have the Murray County chapter, the Wright County chapter, the Stearns County chapter, and they work within that county to raise money and then decide how best they think they should spend that money on local projects in their county. And then so Tanner's job, my job, and all of Minnesota PF's job is to help them leverage that locally raised dollars. So they may say, I have $1 to spend and I want a farm bill biologist. Tanner goes and figures out how to work with the partners he mentioned, NRCS, FSA, DNR, and bring money to the table so they can get a farm bill biologist in that county to promote private land programs. And so the public land side of it, a lot of chapters have seen and experienced the same thing as you, Brian, and there's a lot of hunters. There's not a lot of habitat that's open to the public. Private land habitat is getting harder and harder to access for, common Joe. And so they want to protect land in fee title. They want to make it wildlife habitat, and they want it open to the public. And so in Minnesota, there is a lot of energy and support to buy land, protect it in perpetuity, and make it open to the public. And so we have a lot of partnerships across the state that do just that. And so we have one component of, and I'll get to this, the legacy, the donation of land to Pheasants Forever. We also have another side of that where Pheasants Forever, to the tune of about 4,000 acres a year, is acquiring land with different partners like our Legacy Amendment, DNR, Fish and Wildlife Service, a host of other partners, and buying land, restoring it, donating it to either the DNR as a wildlife management area or the Fish and Wildlife Service as a waterfowl production area. So it's protected in perpetuity, and then it becomes open to the public for outdoor recreation. So that's a quick synopsis of a public land program, but it's very much supported by our chapters and our partners and our staff in the state.
So I got a topic I would like to discuss, and I think we'll swing back to it for closing a little bit, and you guys can touch on it if you want or pass it if you don't. But I've got a big soft spot for native game birds, and in some circles, and maybe definitely not in your circles, but pheasants could be looked at as somewhat invasive. They're not native to North America. They are a great game bird. I will not argue with anybody who says that pheasants are the gateway to the uplands, because I will tell you right now, it was the first game bird I shot. However, when you're acquiring these pieces of property, Pheasants Forever has, at some point, you've got a lot of influence on what happens on that piece of property, and you bring in partners and you kind of make this project happen. How much of your directive is looked at from a solely pheasants perspective and believing that additional wildlife will benefit from what you do for pheasants versus a holistic approach, from the state here in Minnesota has written off bobwhite quail. Same thing in Wisconsin. You go down to Iowa and things get a little different. We have sharp-tailed grouse here in Minnesota. We've got greater prairie chicken. So there's other game birds that do play a role into the habitat. And how much of that are you guys trying to incorporate versus maybe say when the organization was started versus back in the 80s?
Well, that is a great question. It's something we get asked a fair amount. And so,
because I honestly would love to see bobwhite quail back on the landscape, but without organizations like yourselves, now you guys are part of Quail Forever. I'm actually part of the local Quail Forever chapter here in the Twin Cities. But they're just, there's a fight almost that's bigger than the hunter to do some of these things. And without you guys kind of getting on board or leveraging some of your kind of 800-pound gorilla animal, we can't convince the DNR to do something. There's a quail season in Wisconsin. Minnesota doesn't have one. These are really interesting paradigms between the states. And what I found, the only commonality is at the state level is that there's no management plan for them because they believe it was a product of development, and now there's just nothing we can do for them. And I just personally can't accept that. So I'm just kind of interested in how much these other game birds have come into play within your organization as you guys develop these pieces of property and then look to transfer ownership of them.
Yeah. So, first, we like to say that pheasants are exotic. They aren't invasive. So you are correct. They are not native to Minnesota, but they do play a great role, and they're a great indicator of the health of and the balance.
And I agree with that. And the only reason I say invasive is because I've got a soft spot for the native game birds.
Yeah. And you mentioned it already. We, even though we're called Pheasants Forever, we are the habitat organization. And the habitat is what drives our mission and our work and our projects. And so when you know where you are in the landscape makes a difference to how to answer your question. And
Oh,
so
100%.
when
I mean,
you look at a state like Minnesota, we have big woods, we have forest prairie transition, we have prairie pothole. And a couple of the cool things we're doing is we are fighting some of those declines, like you mentioned, sharp-tailed grouse. We have a partnership with the Sharp-tailed Grouse Society and trying to maintain and keep that small population in east central Minnesota of native sharptails on the landscape through opening up the woods, basically, and getting some of those brushland areas that are so critical to the sharptails. And so we have a partnership where we're acquiring land, we're enhancing land in that area, as well as northwest Minnesota, where the sharptail population is a little bit healthier. Additionally, we have a partnership with the Prairie Chicken Society in the southern Red River Valley, where we're working to protect key prairie chicken areas that not only benefit prairie chickens and their leks and adjacent areas and habitats, but also there's overlap with pheasants there. There's overlap with waterfowl there. That's some of the highest waterfowl densities the state has, and that's all revolving. Our decisions on what we're doing there predominantly are the same. So you're looking at restoring wetlands, you're looking at restoring native prairie, and everybody knows the plight of the prairie, or I'm guessing they do. We've lost 99% of our grasslands in Minnesota. So by restoring prairie, we're benefiting a lot of native and non-native game species, but also a whole host of non-game species, songbirds and pollinators. We talked a little bit about this, but water quality, protecting and restoring marginal farmland does so much more that's important to every single person on this planet, whether you're a hunter or not. And really that's kind of how Pheasants Forever's approach is
well, and
how can we do the best for as many things as possible.
you talk about water quality, and Eran, you've never left the state of Minnesota, so I don't know if you're a vacationer, but I tell you right now, this time of year, I look at my family who's migrated south to Florida, and I kind of scratch my head on what the hell I'm doing up here. But you go down to Florida, and we're all outdoorsmen, and I love to fish, and saltwater fishing to me is really killed a lot of my freshwater fishing. And once you kind of get hooked on some of that stuff, it's really hard to come up here and catch walleyes. I'm not going to lie. So Eran, if you love walleyes, I'd stay away from the saltwater if you haven't quite ventured into that. But they deal with all kinds of water issues in South Florida. And you look at the complex issue that is, and it has to do with, really not allowing the Everglades to be the filter for South Florida. When you talk about a piece of farmland and the micro case that leaving in marginal wetland area that had once been tilled over, or educating just a farmer on no-till practices and being able to retain that topsoil and not end up putting that in the creek and downstream from that and into the Minnesota River and into the Mississippi River and all the way out to the Gulf. I mean, people don't understand that piece of grasslands is a buffer area and holds soil, and it retains, all of the stuff that we don't want in the water system.
And it dives into even, carbon sequestration, if you want to, dive into buzzwords and,
now you're talking a language that I don't know, but
there's tons of ecometric services that, these grasslands and these conservation practices are providing. And, I just want to jump in quick and
one of the things I wanted to ask you, based on some of the things Eran said, Tanner, is I'm assuming that because you are overseeing the field biologists now, that you guys would have people in these areas where, because they're not very big, the prairie chickens exist or the sharptails exist, that do have a dynamic and understanding of what's going on and have to take into consideration these other game birds. I do know
Absolutely.
that QF put a biologist down in southeastern Minnesota. And so that's good to see that, you got Quail Forever as an organization felt it was important enough, and their local chapter was able to raise the funds to put a biologist down there. So,
Yeah, you set me up. I was just going to go there, Brian.
okay.
So that's perfect. So yeah, we have a farm bill biologist who does fantastic work in kind of the Aiken area. And his primary goal is open landscapes and sharp-tailed grouse. We've got a biologist up in the Thief River area as well, that's working on a host of species. You mentioned Southeast Minnesota and quail. Biologists down there doing fantastic things and working with landowners directly with quail projects, and the desire for folks in that area to hear that whistle again. So it's bigger than a pheasant. A lot
Well,
bigger.
that's really good to hear, because I'll tell you right now that statement of wanting to hear that whistle again just gave me a little bit of the goosebumps. I don't know. I was introduced to the Covey Rise at Bob White Quail about 5 years ago, and it is by far, to me, the most addictive upland hunting I've ever been involved in. Having 25 birds bust from your feet, you just can't replace it. I've been told that Hungarian partridge are the same, but again, they're just not. They've been another one of these exotic species, as you guys would like to consider. So they're not as they don't have the nostalgia for me. But anyways.
And part of it is, the landscape that you're in and what species adapt to it, right? So down in my area in southwest Minnesota, pheasants thrive.
There used to be some Huns down there, I heard.
There's still some. They're actually making a little bit of a comeback.
That's kind of what I've heard a few mutterings, but I've personally not experienced any Huns in Minnesota.
Yep. I mean, there's none down here. Sorry. or pheasants. Sorry.
What I find very interesting, at least about the Huns, since we brought it up in Minnesota, is you go to Google and you type in Huns in Minnesota, and just the comment and message board things that you hear you read, it's just kind of funny. It almost it takes you back to a little bit of history, and it's like, one of these years I'm just going to put a focus on it. That's what I just want to. It's an interesting thing for me. I grew up over in eastern Wisconsin, where there was some Hungarian partridge, and about when I got to be in high school, they just disappeared. So, yeah, I'm going to go to Montana this September and chase them. Just helps that they start their season out really early. So,
kind of interesting. I'm looking at a picture right now that's by my desk here, and it's a picture of me when I'm about my kid's age, 5 to 7, somewhere in there, standing on my parents' deck. And it's my dad and be my great grandpa, sitting there with a limit of hunts and listening to stories of my dad and talking about all the Huns that they used to chase in southwest Minnesota. It's pretty inspiring for me to be able to go out now and, kick a few up here and there and see some on the roadsides and hopping around. So comes back to habitat again.
And if I can just jump in there quick, we kind of started this conversation about legacy, and, Tanner talked about being inspired by a picture, and, now that Pheasants Forever is, going to be celebrating our 40 years of existence here next year, there's a lot of folks that have been with us for 10, 20, even more than I've been around, 30, 40 years now, and helping support our mission and seeing what the mission has done for habitat and water and pollinators in their backyard. And they come to us, folks like Gene Hauer, and say, the time for me, I have to leave a legacy. I want to leave a legacy with my land. I don't want to see a house on it. I don't want it to be, maybe farmed, or, everybody's got different reasons, but the end result is they want their land protected, or they want to help protect some land and make sure that that's part of their legacy. And, so a lot of folks are coming to Pheasants Forever and asking if we can help them leave their legacy through permanent land protection that is open to the public. And that was the case of Gene Hauer, that news release that you were looking at, Brian.
Yeah, and that was really interesting to me, because I think I personally feel that is a very unique thing to Minnesota. Given the fact that Pheasants Forever was, started here, I just see more land donated by families and people who want to see a legacy and restore those memories that Tanner's talking about. I really think it's a very Minnesotan thing. I don't know if you guys were born and raised here. I don't know if you feel the same way about that or have maybe hunted in enough other states, but per capita, of the amount of hunting land that we have, when you think about wildlife management areas that are in the state, a lot of them are donated family farms from decades ago. And they still continue to be. And this particular property that you're referencing is one of those properties.
We've already established I don't get out much, so I have a very good knowledge of Minnesota, not so much other states when it comes to this. But, Tanner's talking about that story with the Huns, and it's amazing when we're talking to all these landowners who are either buying or donating or selling at a discount these properties that we're acquiring. They all have stories just like that. They remember driving or walking through the pasture and seeing Huns flush or sharp tails or pheasants, they all have their own unique stories about how they connected to wildlife and habitat, and they feel like they've lost it or are going to lose it, and that's why they're talking to Pheasants Forever. And it's easy to tell stories about that, and those are that's what gets me up every day. But when you add all those stories up, I just want to throw out a quick number. $9 million worth of land has been donated to Pheasants Forever in Minnesota in the last, say 20 some years. So it's not just them talking about the good old days. They feel so strongly about protecting their land and having that legacy that they're putting their money where their mouth is. And that's just a cool stat that I love to talk about a lot. Is this is really important stuff, not just to Pheasants Forever, but to people.
Well, and I hope through you guys being able to continually grow as an organization and come on podcasts as willingly as you guys are, that number grows. I think we need it here in the state. We all have felt the pressure of both people and declining numbers, albeit the numbers for the last couple of years in the state have been actually coming up. I think I've saw way more birds the last day of pheasant season here in Minnesota than I ever expected to see this season. So, now granted, I was on private land, but we were adjacent to a piece of weehaw and walk-in. I'm sorry, Kansas reference there. But it's really neat to see the effort and kind of see the fruits of the labor, I guess you could say. And I really felt it this year.
Absolutely.
So, given the fact that we've talked about a smattering of different topics here today, do either one of you have anything that you feel like you did not clear the air on or we did not cover that is terribly important you want to talk about?
There's one thing I would add. So we talked about private land habitat. We talked about acquiring and creating public land. And the one thing we didn't talk about, Tanner alluded to it a little bit, that, grasslands need management. So you can't just create native prairie. And
yeah, we didn't talk about grazing either. And you did mention that earlier. So if there's anything either one of you want to mention about that as well.
Yeah, the worst thing you can do is plant it and walk away. Quite frankly, prairie grasslands, we could call it CRP if you want to, going back to previous comments, but it needs management. Historically, it had management, and it is a huge component of, restoring and enhancing property, which I think is where Eran's going to go.
Yeah, so I just, one of the things that we sometimes hear, and it's a fair comment, is, you guys are protecting and buying new public land at the tune of about 4,000 acres a year. What are you doing to make the land that we already have as good as it can be? And so we also have a very significant enhanced public lands program in Minnesota that is doing just that. DNR, Fish and Wildlife, and a host of other folks are also doing a lot of great work making sure that our public lands are managed appropriately, depending where they are in the state. But there's an opportunity for Pheasants Forever to help with that, and our enhanced public lands accomplishes that. So we're primarily working in the prairie and prairie forest transition areas, and last year alone, we enhanced almost 11,000 acres of existing public land. So that's doing, things like prescribed fire, invasive tree removal, diversity seeding on, monotypic types of stanza grass, some conservation grazing, which I won't talk about that too much because Tanner might want to say a few things about that. But so we are trying to have a real comprehensive approach in protecting new properties, having a strong private land program, but then also making sure that we're taking care of the public land that we have as well as we can.
Tanner, let's touch on grazing for a second, because I spend a fair amount of time, like I mentioned, in Kansas each upland season. And when I drive, just pure perception, but I drive from home to western Minnesota to hunt pheasants, or I drive from wherever I'm staying in Kansas to hunt. I see a hell of a lot more cattle in Kansas than I do in Minnesota. And I know that's a little bit more regional specific here in Minnesota than it is maybe say in Kansas, and especially where I hunt. I'm not too terribly far from Dodge City in some cases. And if anybody knows about Dodge City, it's a hell of a cattle town. So with that being said, how much of our public land from grasslands perspective here in Minnesota is grazed?
I would say not enough, quite frankly.
Well, I would say not enough, because I've been on enough of these pieces of property where if, you had controlled grazing going on, there could definitely be a more diverse habitat of grasslands, because the cattle won't eat certain grass, and they typically will eat the grass that we don't want to have out in these areas for pheasant, if I recall.
And there's tons of different management practices you can do with livestock and grazing, based on your objective for that particular property. And I don't know the exact number.
Was part of the reason, I guess, part of the reason, there isn't enough grazing is because we don't have enough grazing cattle here in Minnesota.
I would say that does play a role. But part of it is, you go out to the Dakotas and stuff, and there is a lot more. And part of it is the culture and, again, livestock being more prevalent as well.
And we've got, you go from basically west of the Minnesota River all the way out to, Granite City, per se, right out, damn near out to Marshall. There's some really, really fertile soil, which is a lot more fertile than I would say in most areas out west of the Red River Valley and whatnot. Yep. So we definitely take advantage of that. I just look at cost per acre in the Minnesota River Valley or anywhere down where, Blue Earth County, things like that, versus cost per acre out on, say, a quarter section in North Dakota that's, a cattle farm.
Yep.
Totally different. So it's a very complex conversation, probably worth a whole podcast to air the grievances with that. But do what you can with it, I guess.
Yeah. And I would completely agree. And I would say grazing and livestock is growing in Minnesota. There's a greater emphasis on it. And, that includes, grazing and utilizing livestock as a management tool on our public lands and our private lands. And that's been seen through, different restrictions through Farm Bill programs and making it easier to get livestock on those conservation acres. And I guess for listeners, one thing I would like to just point out is the more livestock you have, the more grass you're going to have. And, going back to the cow eats grass, pheasant needs grass, the worst thing you can do for grass is not manage it. And, a lot of people get a little bit of a misconception in their head on what grazing is, and they drive by something that's been mowed down to golf course level. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about conservation grazing. and rotation.
Well, and I think that's a good point to make, because I do think that for the most part here in the heart of the Midwest, Wisconsin, Minnesota, our farms are much smaller, dairy oriented, and I would say that the majority of the farms that people drive by, the perception that they have here locally in our area is that they are overgrazed, because the fact is they are overgrazed. They're smaller farms. Their production level has been maximized to the point that, it's a very complex issue when you deal with how much land in our area is put into corn and soybean production.
Yep.
Versus and then the dairy farm. So they're supplementing the feed with what they grow and grazing less than, I would say, a larger beef cattle operation, like you're talking about the culture differences. So
Yep.
it's a complex issue, and it's a very hard thing to draw a paradigm with. But when you talk about looking at controlled grazing, it's not what people normally think. And maybe can you explain that a little bit to people?
Yeah. So there's essentially, when you're looking at doing, conservation grazing, you've got an objective in mind. A lot of folks nowadays are putting in paddocks or only allowing the livestock based on a certain amount of head per acre within this subset of the pasture. And then through that, they're able to move the livestock, whatever kind it is, throughout this, entire operation. So you've got anything that just recently got grazed down to stuff that's been, standing there pretty much all year, which, if you want to look at it from a wildlife perspective, they like edge, they like diversity, and that provides, that heterogeneity within that certain area. And if you think of it as utilizing livestock as a management tool on public lands, if you take a step back and look at it, so not only are you providing that service or that management to the public land, you're also giving that pasture, that private pasture, an opportunity to rest. So you're doing two different services where you're providing better habitat on the private pasture, and you're also providing better habitat on that public land through the utilization of livestock.
Plus, you're also breaking down that barrier between farmer and hunter.
Mm-hmm.
Really, I mean, you are bringing the two together. And I think that's really important, because I do think that the misnomer out there today, you look at just this instance, you look at a row crop and you look at CRP field, and which one are you going to hunt? And that dynamic lends itself to the hunter kind of going, well, the farmer's kind of screwing us here. And I think by allowing the grazing to happen, bringing them cattle on and showing people how this works, both on that private pasture land and on the piece of property that, I'll be honest, I've walked on enough of public land here in Minnesota that could definitely use a controlled burn, or bring in some cattle, something to just regen the grasslands, because they're choked out by, canary grass or something that's not really developed good pheasant habitat. And it's bringing that symbiotic relationship with everybody who's got cards in the game, everybody who's got a chip at the table, and we all have to be in this together in order to solve the problem of declining habitat, declining bird numbers, and more people wanting to get outdoors.
Yeah, and there's tons of great farmers out there doing tons of conservation, and same thing with everything. There's some that that also may not take into consideration a lot of conservation on their farm, and maybe have a little bit different perspective, being raised in Southwest Minnesota. My grandpa owned the sale barn down there, relatives that farm, and I've always had a great appreciation for everything that they do, and going and hopping in a combine with them, and taking a few of the end rows out and having a conversation. And I maybe take that for granted a little bit, but there are a lot of people out there doing a lot of great things, and it takes all of us to accomplish those overall goals. And making sure that we have profitable farms, we have wildlife habitat, we're providing the water quality benefits, the soil benefits, carbon sequestration, all the above. And it's very crucial to work together and build these relationships, build these partnerships for just an overall good of Minnesota and everywhere, quite frankly.
I agree, and I think Minnesota is a great case, and I think that culture here in Minnesota lends itself well to be an example for kind of the nation.
I just want to chime in here quick. Speaking of partnerships, and I guess I alluded to it a little bit in earlier conversation, but I'm not sure that all Minnesotans know how lucky they are to live in Minnesota as it relates to just activity of land protection, land improvement, and just quality of life. Back in 2008, Minnesota voters approved overwhelmingly the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment, which is constitutionally dedicated funding from the sales tax. And that generates north of $300 million that goes directly to fish and wildlife habitat, parks and trails, clean water, and the arts. And that's going to be coming up for renewal in 2034. And I doubt anybody that voted for it or didn't has noticed a difference in the sales tax and things like that. But that money is critical for a lot of the work we've talked about today, and specifically Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council, which oversees the fish and wildlife portion of that dedicated funding, have been a great partner of Pheasants Forever and all kinds of conservation and folk outdoor groups that care about wildlife habitat. And without them, Minnesota would look very different right now. So just a shout out to all those folks who saw that and had the vision to vote for that constitutionally dedicated funding, and we sure hope you will again in 2034.
Tanner, anything?
No, I think that we could probably sit here and, if you wanted to, do a 4 to 8 hour podcast, but I don't know. I don't know how long people would listen, but
no, but I think we covered a number of topics here today that, again, I did this with another listener or another guest here just the other day for a podcast that's coming up. It'll probably air just before this one. If there is any specific topics that we covered today that any of the listeners want to hear more about, contact information for all three of us will be in the show notes, and feel free to email any one of us for a specific call or call us, whatever, for anything more specific. And if there's something we covered you'd love to hear a show about, let us know too, or something we didn't cover that you'd like to hear a show about. I want to maybe go on a little bit of a limb here and say that you boys would mind coming back for a deeper dive into some of these topics if somebody wanted to know more.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I own the one thing I did want to ask both you guys, and maybe we can use this as kind of a closing notes thing. It's something that's kind of been bothering me for a long while as we talk about all the different elements to managing and moving forward and different paradigms that face us today than maybe 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago when the organization was started. Today, you look at the relationship with, and this is specifically on the agricultural side of things, and Pheasants Forever being that voice for the conservationist and the hunter out there at the table more at maybe a national level. And some of you guys might not want to touch on this. You might have a comment, or maybe we'll pass it off for another show. But I think a lot of people are starting to open their eyes a little bit more to the use of chemicals in the practice of farming and agriculture today, both good and bad. I think there's a negative connotation out there in the public with some of, obviously, genetically modified organisms. And then today too, with some of the pesticides, herbicides, and other chemicals that are used. Is Pheasants Forever doing any work on state or national level to research on where we're at kind of today with the use of these practices, and any type of relationship to the decline of pheasants and other game birds and wildlife, because I think there's a lot of personal lines being drawn. People, you just turn on the sportsman's channel at a certain time of the day, and the commercials are say, well, if you ever live close to a farm and Monsanto's and this, and you've got cancer, like, call, we'll give you some money. So I have to believe that you guys are doing something or considering it. And, you guys are kind of the organization from us conservation minded hunters that want to move things forward in life. We got to have a pushback a little bit, I think, on chemicals and how much of, you look at just the herbicide issue or a pesticide issue. We know that young chicks and broods need bugs to rear their clutch and have a nice good brood. I mean, the young chicks need bugs and certain things during certain times of the year. And you go through and spray chemicals on a field and kill bugs, and all of a sudden now there's no bugs. I think you guys obviously have something going on with pollinators and bees. You want to touch that topic at all? Any of you? It's a very loaded question because I'm not exactly sure how to ask it to you guys.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's a huge issue. It's big, and in a lot of cases, we don't know what we don't know as it relates to that.
Well, and that's just it. I haven't heard the conversation develop to a point where I would like it to, I guess, maybe.
So, a couple of my thoughts, and Tanner can certainly chime in here if you'd like, but we are monitoring it. Certainly those questions that you asked are important as it relates to Pheasants Forever. When we buy land and restore it, we need to make sure we know what's been on that property, how it's been treated, and how it may affect our restorations.
Hey, and there's that train.
Hey, train.
I told you it was going to happen.
I guess we went over that hour. But,
well, hey, if we want, I can leave a little silence here, possible another ad that possibly could get placed too, if you want to wait.
Sure.
Just let me know when it goes by. I'll edit this part out.
I don't hear it anymore, Aaron.
You might have.
It's still there.
I can't. If there's a noise gate on your microphone that the software puts on, so if you're not talking, it mutes you.
Oh, I see. So just got to let it play out here still.
It sounds, for the most part, from what I heard, it sounds like it's over. So,
okay.
Anyways, Tanner, I'm sorry, Aaron. After the train now has passed and we've got an opportunity to maybe make a little more money here at the podcast, can you finish answering that question?
Yeah. So, we are monitoring that issue. It does affect potentially our restorations, but, it's part of our focus is habitat, and how do we get habitat on the landscape? So that's always going to be our focus. Other groups, other folks are tackling that issue more directly. But I also think it's kind of just a change in culture too. I mean, I equate it to our habitat development. Back when we first started, we were planting brome grass in a lot of situations through CRP, and that was the best practice at the time. Now we're planting diverse warm season native prairies and flowers and very diverse mixes, and it's part of the growth. And I think
the sunflowers, man, the sunflowers, that sunflower seed that you have in your, I think it's just your native prairie mix. A lot of the folks in Kansas have put it in. I will tell you right now, the quail love that stuff. I have this past year, I saw so much of it planted in the last 2 years out there. And I have seen quail in the middle of pastures that have been grazed properly, and there's enough of that seed component that gives that stem density the quail like, and I'll be damned, there's quail out in the middle of that pasture land just because there's enough of that sunflower patch that was planted there. The cows didn't touch it when they pastured or when they grazed it earlier in the year, and they got them out of there in time and left enough grass. And it was I think we moved 2 coveys in that piece of property, and I've driven past it for 5 years, never hunted it. So,
And so I kind of think that that's the same with agriculture. I mean, they're growing, they're learning. Just a local example from my spot here. We've never done anything with cover crops that I've witnessed, and there's a lot of folks utilize a lot of agriculture producers using cover crops now, trying to keep that soil in place, try to build their soil structure, and I think that's the same with chemicals.
and just
they're trying to do the best thing.
give a quick explanation for somebody kind of like myself who would be kind of a little bit more ignorant to the term cover crops.
Well, it's trying to keep something on the producing soil, or within their crop fields year round.
So I see it in Kansas where they'll might do corn or milo, and then right after that they'll plant like a wheat or a rye that'll be in that field till springtime. And then they'll put it back into production on corn or soybean or whatever their rotation is.
Yep. And the whole goal with that is to keep the soil intact, to minimize, weed pressure, minimize inputs of fertilizers and other things like chemicals, like we were talking about. And so there's a lot of producers now experimenting and trying to see what would work within their system, where historically there was not a lot of that. So I think, the ag world's trying to grow and do the best thing by the environment, generally speaking, as they can as well. And so that would be my answer. I don't know if Tanner wants to add anything to that.
Well, I see that too. And my question was a little bit more on from, your Pheasants Forever just doesn't do habitat. You guys have a seat you lobby in Congress at both the state and national level. And that's a little bit more where the question was kind of coming from, but I appreciate the holistic approach to the answer, Eran.
Mm-hmm.
Tanner, do you have anything to add on that topic? I just think, from the average hunter, when they go out and they see that stuff, it's like it's always a negative impression. And I know that you guys are working at least to help find that relationship for the agricultural industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, agree with Eran, and, comes back to habitat as the habitat organization. But, with that being said, we do have relationships, and we are working with commodity groups, soybeans, corn, sorghum, the list goes on. And it is evolving. As Eran mentioned, the use of cover crops and, the reduction of different fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides. So it's there's an interest.
How do you kill fescue though? I mean, that's I mean, and I'm just being realistic. My question was kind of from that unrealistic conservation aspect of, hey, we love to go back to what things used to be, but honestly, it's unrealistic. We can't go back. It's not existent. Time moves forward. So we have to move forward. We have to look at what we have today and how can we take that and move forward and make things better. So yeah, it's a complex issue because I'll tell you right now, I don't really have a whole lot of options for myself when it comes to removing fescue from my pastured farmland.
Yeah. And, those people are out there making a living and they rely on those crops, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we all rely on the crops, quite frankly. And
it's a huge reliance that I think I catch myself being, that kind of negative, and at least in my head, thinking about things, driving past all that row crop. And, I catch myself doing it and I go, dude, that row crop's feeding that cattle, that putting the milk in your refrigerator. It's feeding the cattle, or it's going to the ethanol plant you're burning in your truck. And I mean, there's a huge relationship there that I don't think a lot of people understand. And, you say you may have taken an appreciation for riding in the combine, but hell, I think a lot of people have taken appreciation for where their food comes from.
Yep. And we need to continue growing food and fiber and fuel. And, for these individuals, they're looking to maximize what they can produce, right? Because it's their livelihood. And we also want habitat on the ground. So, producing what you can out of your good acres and providing habitat on the rest that provide all these other ecosystem services.
Well, I think you guys should come on back on the podcast soon, and we should talk about that precision ag and the relationship it plays, because I think a lot of people don't hear that it's that behind the curtain act and stuff that you guys do, that there's a lot more to Pheasants Forever than just what your local chapter banquet is kind of my point. And I think that relationship is really crucial long term to maximizing both potential for farming operations and utilization for all the community, as well as maximizing wildlife and availability for people to go hunt that stuff. And hell, just good water to go have nice lakes to go fish in. I mean, we have here, I think we all can attest to this, and you guys might get a chuckle out of this, but I've seen my fair share of green cesspools here in Minnesota. and we all know that's come from, over putting too much nitrogen in the fields that washes off and ends up in these lakes that all of a sudden now have an algae bloom that they never had. And I think for the most part, we've gotten a pretty good control on a lot of that stuff, but at least have turned some of the corner. But at the end of the day, we've all experienced it. And it's you guys working with the farmers, working with us, and bringing the state in that helps clean up all of these things and really builds a better landscape going forward.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. We're all in this together, and we'd love to come back and talk about precision ag and some of their things we didn't have a chance to touch on today too. So
exactly,
anytime.
like Tanner said, we could probably go for 4 to 8 hours. I have a lot of questions, and I just kind of scratched the surface on some of my interest here today. Well, boys, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I'll kind of pass the mic off to both of you too. Anything you want to say here in closing, and I'll include your contact information and stuff in the show notes. And we'll also include a little information on the CRP enrollment program and a specific link for that. Anything else you guys want me to include, or anything else in closing?
Well, I'll just add, just again, thanks for having us on. One thing I don't think I mentioned related to public land is if folks want to find a new piece of public land to hunt, or they just want to go to a different part of the state and see what it's like, if you want to hunt a property that was acquired by Pheasants Forever, it may be a WMA now or WPA, but go to our website, pheasantsforever.org. Click on conservation at the top, and then if you scroll down, you'll see a bullet that says public land acquisitions map. And you click on that, and it'll bring up the state of Minnesota. There's going to be all these pheasant icons. You can click on any of those pheasant icons, and it'll tell you a little bit about the property, when we acquired it, who the partners were, maybe a little photo or description of the kind of property it is, whether it's good for pheasants or turkeys or whatever, and where it's located. You can click on Google Maps and it'll bring you right to that property. So if you're tired of hunting the same old 2 or 3 pieces of public land close to home, and you want to get out and explore, that's a great tool to see what Pheasants Forever has been doing. Or if you're a supporter of Pheasants Forever and you want to see what we did with your funding, that's a great spot to go experience it firsthand.
And I would just throw out there, as you guys have heard, we've got a lot of fantastic things going on here in Minnesota. And if you have any questions, if you're a landowner and you want to see what kind of opportunities there are out there, reach out or use the pheasantsforever.org/CRP. If you have some public lands out there that you have an interest in, or comments, if you're looking to get involved in your local chapter, if you're looking to volunteer, all these different things are opportunities, and feel free to reach out to Eran or I. And if we can't directly help you, we'll get you to the place that you need to get to.
Well, I will also say in closing, and you guys can probably add just a little bit to this, COVID really hurt a lot of these chapters The number one funding mechanism for any one of your conservation groups, from Rough Grouse Society to Trouts Unlimited to Pheasants Forever, is the chapter banquets. And with COVID shutting everything down, none of these banquets really happened in a fashion that drew funding in anything normal. So please join if you have not joined. If your chapter did not have a banquet, that doesn't mean the chapter doesn't exist anymore. Make sure you're still a member of Pheasants Forever. People may have heard me on the podcast have, a little bit of bitching and moaning about Pheasants Forever stealing the limelight. But at the end of the day, you guys truly are making things happen, even for the native game birds that I might, my little thorn in the side. I still join every year, but my Quail Forever dollars, at least up here, feel like I'm going a little bit further. And that's only just a personal thing. But no, you guys can attest to this too, that, I don't know, you guys are both probably in two different local chapters. Did you guys have banquets last year?
Just speaking, I volunteer for right where I live here in Wright County, and we did have our first banquet last September in, I think, 2 years.
Yep.
So,
okay. Because I know they're all kind of starting to come back now. I'm going to an RGS banquet here, and I got some information on a Pheasants Forever banquet here locally too. And our Quail Forever chapter is trying to do something here this summer. So it's finally starting to open up, which is great funding. But, people have to, A, remember to go out, and B, if they haven't gone out to the banquet, they might not be a member anymore. So make sure that the dollars are very much needed at this point, because you guys have got the snowball rolling downhill, I think, and good things are to come.
Indeed. Thank you for having us on, Brian.
I appreciate it. Tanner, anything else on that?
No, I appreciate it. I also volunteer here locally, and we did have a banquet this past spring, an outdoor venue. Attendance was down.
Yep.
Didn't have one the year prior to, and we need all the local support we can get, all the local volunteers. It's critically important to, I guess, our habitat mission and overall conservation in Minnesota. So anything you can do to jump back in the ring or help support us, we appreciate it.
I appreciate it, guys. One of the things I do in all my closing of the shows is telling the listeners to join their local conservation group. So I'll make sure to do that again here on this show. So I still think we are rocking the kick-ass, most best podcasting bumper music. Let me know if you think differently. All right, you loyal listeners, thank you for listening to episode 44 of the Amazing Outdoors podcast. Make sure you get over to Patreon, Amazing Outdoors. That's patreon.com/Amazing Outdoors. $5 month of March. If you don't waste your time, you'll probably still be able to scoop a hat and get an entry into June's drawing for Uplnd Outfitter bird hunting pants. The hats are going to the first 10 patrons that, support the show, help us grow the show and this community. And yeah, visit that Patreon page so it's patreon.com/Amazing Outdoors. There's a link in the show notes. If you are going to head on over there to the link in the show notes, check out the link for Patriots of Praise. Get out and join that local conservation effort by joining like RGS or Pheasants Forever. Get in that CRP program. I really, really do encourage you to take somebody new, maybe the neighbor kid, out next time you go on your next endeavor into the outdoors. But most of all, folks, God bless you. God bless this great country, America. Shoot straight, tight lines, and get outside and get outdoors. Enjoy the spring. I'm Brian Mays, and I'm out of here.